Hey everyone, it's Elliot. This isn't actually the opening of the podcast. This is just me letting you know that the podcast you're about to hear is the Patreon pod from last week, where we discussed Fandom and the Xhaka incident and the Aubameyang thing, and just kind of went over what it means to be a fan of the club and what our role is in the success and potentially failure of the club. And there's some memory stuff in there and just some other interlully kind of stuff. So we hope you enjoy it. We're putting it out for everyone today because I think it prompted some interesting feedback and conversations, and we're interested to get your take on it. Having said that, there will also be a Patreon pod coming out in a few hours after this. It'll be a mailbag pod, so there's still plenty of time to get questions in if you want to sign up and put your questions in. In the middle of this, we're going to drop in a little ad break for The Athletic, so hopefully you'll sign up for that at theathletic.com/ArsenalVision. We got a lot more good stuff coming up this week, and with the football coming back, plenty of regular pods, so hope you enjoy this one, and we'll talk to you soon.
Arteta! What a strike! What a screamer!
Well, this is some breaking news. We have just been handed a first copy of a report generated within the club. It turns out that they have carefully canvassed all of the issues surrounding the performance of the team, the players, the manager. They have, in fact, been diving deep into this, wanting to get to the bottom of the problem. And the good news is the report has found the locus of the issue. The problem is you. So fix up. This is the Arsenal Vision post-match podcast. My name is Elliot Smith. You can block me on Twitter, Yankee Gunner. That's right, we are living in Gaslight Nation, apparently. Happening all over the world, in fact. And with respect to Arsenal, I think it is fair to say that the fans are, in fact, the problem. So now that we've gotten to the root of it, the core of it, we can eliminate it and just eliminate the fans. And maybe that is, in fact, the club's clever ploy. What on earth am I talking about? We'll get into that, but I do want to sort of explore the question of fans' role in the performance of a team, the proper ways of support, what kinds of fan groups are appropriate and allowed and are not appropriate and allowed, and things like that. So one of the reasons that comes up is we'll be discussing the Aubameyang issue, newly named captain and acting like the captain does by apparently being completely toxic. I kid. I absolutely love him, as you know. But there are some issues. And so Lewis Ambrose will be joining us later. He is a student of and supporter of Dortmund as well as Arsenal. So he can give us some background on Aubameyang's supposed troubles when he was at Dortmund and how that reflects on what's happening now at Arsenal and what his take on that is. But before we do that, Tim, you may know him on Twitter as Stoberto, is here. Hello, Tim.
Hello there.
Tim, I want to get your take on something just quickly. You know, there's been, first of all, you sort of do some journalism in your own right, and I don't mean that in a condescending way, by the way, however it may have sounded. You know, David Ornstein has been doing a lot of reporting about the Aubameyang thing, reporting about what the club's feelings are on Emery, and there are questions. I think people say he's making it up, or it's not factual, or how do we know that's what the club really thinks? And I'm curious to get your take when he comes out with something about how the club feels or what the club thinks, or comes out with a comment like, you know, the atmosphere around the club or the noise around the club. To what extent do you think it is fair to have sort of questions about the authenticity or veracity of that claim as it relates to the club really feeling that way at the highest corridors of power? And to what extent do you think people will just look for any excuse sort of not to believe a report that they don't align with?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting question, isn't it? Because when you know, obviously sources have to remain anonymous, and you never quite know who the source is or how well placed they are or anything like that. I think it's kind of beyond doubt that David Ornstein has very well placed sources at Arsenal. I mean, I think history bears that out quite emphatically. But obviously we don't know who the source is. You know, we don't know if it's, you know, whether it's the tea lady or an administrator or one of the players or, you know, maybe even someone who's in and around the boardroom. Like we don't quite have that level of detail. So, you know, the gap for us is how far is the quote unquote the source inferring and how far are they parroting? You know, how far is this like the club line, or how far is it just like, you know, someone who's kind of hanging around and, you know, got a glass of water on the door of the boardroom, and things like that. And we don't know that. And sources come in like many shapes and sizes, really. They could be any one of those things. I think we can safely assume that David's sources are pretty well placed. And the fact that Arsenal felt the need to brief again and to brief explicitly on this occasion, I think that first of all shows, I think that demonstrates the kind of the esteem that they hold David Ornstein in, or at the very least they understand the esteem that Arsenal fans hold him in, because they felt the need to, to slightly correct that message. But it does, you wonder, as much out of curiosity as anything, not necessarily mistrust, like, who is that source, and have they just worded something a bit clumsily? And
what goes inside the quotes and what goes outside the quotes is very, very important when you're talking about potentially criticizing the fans, Yeah.
And actually the phrase that was used was external atmosphere. So then you ask yourself the question, do they consider, does that exclude the fans? Are they talking about the media and the punditocracy? Do they would they consider, for want of a better phrase, the fans' internal noise? Because it's a clumsy way of phrasing it, but maybe that's what was meant. Maybe they meant the kind of the external noise, aka the media, and the kind of commentariat. They might not. They might have been explicitly excluding the fans by using the very word external, because they might have tried to present it as, well, the fans are internal noise, they're part of the club, and the stadium is literally internal noise because it happens in the stadium, as we saw with Granit Xhaka. But I mean, that's, given the Xhaka incident, that's a really clumsy mistake to make, because we saw with the Xhaka incident, the conflation between internal and external noise is a very clumsy thing to do, and it's something a lot of people have been doing, quite frankly, with that Xhaka incident. The conflation of what's said inside the stadium and what some despicable people say on social media, and so that's quite a silly mistake to make. But also, we don't know whose mistake that is. We don't know if it's a bit of a Chinese whispers scenario, or whether someone's words were taken down, dictated, or whether they were interpreted. This is all just stuff that we don't really know. Well,
you run into a problem, right? Also, which is sometimes it winds up not being true. And anytime there's any instance of any reporter having ever been wrong on any scoop, then every story they put out is open to someone saying, well, they were wrong before. He reported that we weren't in for Pepe. And here's the problem with using sources. If I tell you, Tim, I will be in New York tomorrow talking to a high-level footballer about possibly joining Arsenal, and you report that, and you say sources within Elliot's home tell me this, and then I just don't fucking fly to New York and don't talk to that footballer, you were just lied to. You were given bad information, and you're hung out to dry, and I'm not hung out to dry at all, except, go ahead.
I guess I'd say David spent a lot of his career at the BBC, and at the BBC they have a policy of at least double sourcing, of double checking, and having at least two sources before they go with something. Obviously he's not with the BBC anymore, so but I very much doubt that he's all of a sudden dispensed with that journalistic discipline.
Yes, I agree. Because once you lose that credibility, your currency as a reporter is gone, right? I mean, if you're known for breaking transfer stories, for example, and your hit rate is 1 out of 10, you're Indy Kyla. If your hit rate is 9 out of 10, you're David Ornstein. So, but the only reason I raise this is because a lot of how our perception is being shaped right now is being shaped by what we see on the pitch, which is bad. But then the noise is coming, to use that word again, noise is coming out of the club to try to evaluate whether they understand the extent to which this isn't working, whether they genuinely believe, as we maybe were led to believe, that the fans and the reaction of the fans is part of the problem. And I think that is hard for a lot of people to cope with. So setting aside, the navel-gazing about whether reporters are right or not, where do you fall on the issue of fan responsibility, if there is any at all? I mean, to what extent... and this crosses cultural lines, and for you, someone who goes home and away every game, obviously Arsenal's near and dear to your heart. To what extent do you feel you have an obligation to be propping the club up and helping them win, and that your voice in the crowd and your voice on social media can be part of a positive move forward? Or do you maybe feel that that's just entirely overblown?
This is really difficult because it's so nuanced and it's so subjective. So personally, why don't I start with myself personally and caveat it by saying I'm not saying that everyone should be like me. Personally, I make the distinction between social media and the stadium. I intentionally make that distinction. Like you, I consider social media quite often just like a notepad for my thoughts. Sometimes they're irrational and emotional, and sometimes I look at them kind of 24 hours later and think, yeah, maybe given time I'd reword that or something. But, that's how I felt in the moment. So fuck it, that's fine. That is the representation of how I felt at that moment. Maybe I don't feel as strongly about it now, but it's authentic, and that's how I felt at the time. And I've tweeted, I tweeted something about Emery at the final whistle against Wolves the other week. And it was fairly strong because that's how I felt in the moment. I felt disappointed by the result and the performance and etc. And I kind of think that social media is almost like a bucket to scream into, at times. And I get it. So let's take social media. I'm kind of fine with the visceral reaction like that, like the kind of the half an hour after the final whistle where you blow off steam.
Let's just call it what it is. The one where you tweeted out, "Get rid of this bum."
Yeah,
that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wouldn't have worded that like a couple of hours later, but that's how I felt at the time. And
what's wrong with that? It's authentic.
Exactly.
It's just authentic.
Exactly.
Can I just stop for 1 second? Because if you were in a pub sitting next to your buddy having a beer, and you said, "Oh, we got to get rid of this bum," no one would be like, "How dare you?" Yeah. It's just, social media lives forever. It just does,
Exactly. And that's the thing. When you go to the game, that's what you do. You go for a drink afterwards, or even if you don't, and you just get on the tube home. And in that first half an hour, you moan about the game, you moan about the referee, you moan about the substitutions. That's part of the therapy of getting it out of you. And that's why I never have any kind of shame or regret about those immediate reactions, even though I think, I'd probably tone that down a couple of hours later, because it's no, that's how I felt at the time, and it felt good to get rid of it. And actually the half an hour or hour after the game, everyone's like that anyway, and it's kind of fine. I guess for me personally, it's when it drags on social media and the game's happened on Saturday and it's Tuesday, and there's still that it becomes really dark, and I'm a believer in exercising the negativity out of yourself a little bit. I talk a lot, right, about people being too hard on referees and things like that. I mean, inside the ground, I'm a hypocrite, because inside the ground, I don't do it as much now because I made a really conscious effort not to, but inside the ground, in the immediate aftermath of a decision, of course I shout things like, "You idiot," or sometimes things a little bit stronger, how can you call that a foul, and things like that. But then, if I'm still complaining about it, I don't know, a minute later, I kind of tend to, I never am, basically. I get that out of me, and then it's out. And because otherwise, what can happen? Because otherwise, if you let negativity linger, it just produces more negativity.
It metastasizes, absolutely. Yeah, and builds. And I got to tell you something. This is what really bothers me, this gaslighting about our fans are the worst, Arsenal fans are the worst, Arsenal fans are ruining Arsenal. Is it... one of the things I love about sport, it is one of the most unvarnished parts of your life. In every part of your life, your relationship with your partner, your relationships at work, your relationship with your friends, there has to be something held back. It has to be regulated at some level. You can't just spout your full emotion. And sport is a place to throw yourself unrestrained into the feelings you have. Booing or cheering, elation or depression. It is all very unvarnished and authentic. And in the moment, there's pantomime villains and there's instant heroes. And that will be a classic that lives in the memory. And that's Thomas charging through the midfield, right? That's sport. And the minute you make it, well, you have to be circumspect and you have to bite your tongue on that. And you really should think about what you're saying. Again, and that should not be conflated, to your point, with someone telling someone's sister to die on social media. That's not my point. My point is that the true, unvarnished, authentic reactions are what draws us to sport. The highs and the lows, the villains and the heroes. And so I think the minute you take that out and tell fans that they can only have one reaction and that's the only true and proper reaction, you kill the thing people love about the sport.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know, the way I'd phrase it is the difference, talking about this thin line between exercising yourself a bit and having a bit of a scream and a shout and 30 seconds later it's gone, compared to 4 days later still kind of complaining about the referee or something, just not being able to let it go. The line there is between being childlike and childish.
Very well said. Yeah.
So that kind of that, like you say, that unvarnished, I'm allowed to be a bit emotional here and I'm allowed to say, "Oh, fuck off, referee," and then 10 seconds later it's gone and it's over. And I remember having this really epiphany, to swing this back to inside the stadium, right? I remember having this really epiphanous moment when I was about 10 or 11, and I was at Wimbledon Arsenal at Selhurst Park. It's probably about 1994 or something, and a mass brawl broke out, as it often did between Wimbledon and Arsenal, because they had like horrible bastards like Vinnie Jones and Jason Fashion.
You could literally make up any name you want. 98% of the listeners are going to think it's right. So just keep going.
Probably. And Arsenal had some hard bastards at the time as well. And there was always like a 20-man brawl when we played Wimbledon at Selhurst Park. And it went off. I remember everyone getting up and everyone's just like, fucking hit him, send him off, ref, just everyone shouting. And there's this woman, and I was doing it as well. There's this woman about 2 seats away from me, sat there. And I strongly suspect she wasn't really a football fan, and she kind of went along for curiosity, and she was laughing her arse off. She was just staring at everyone, and she was just giggling, and it was just like, particularly at that age, and then it made me stop and look around and go, yeah, this is funny, isn't it? This is just ridiculous. But like, she wasn't laughing in a derisory way. Like, she seemed to be laughing in a way where she was extracting genuine joy. Like, she wasn't like it wasn't like a look at these idiots. It kind of was, but in a kind of, but I kind of get how this is entertaining and useful. It's like WWE. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's throwaway, it's silly, it's stupid, but it's entertaining. And it stops, for an hour and for 2 hours, kind of every week or every game. It just, people lose a sense of themselves and they lose everything else. And that's kind of the point, and that's the attraction in going. But then you come on to like tricky things like I guess, when is it okay to like boo your own player, for example? And we had this conversation a couple of weeks ago in the wake of the Xhaka thing, and I kind of set the line of, if someone's demonstratively not trying, then I think it's kind of all right. But then everyone has their own impression of what constitutes trying, and like, who knows when someone's trying or when someone's just a bit off their game. And like that expression, I don't think it's really an expression so much, but that kind of, you never know what someone else is going through, so just always be nice, because you never know like what demons other people are fighting or what things people are fighting in their personal lives. Like, everyone's fighting a battle you don't know about. But then there is the kind of, just the theatre of it, just the kind of, oh, you're useless, piss off. And I guess it just depends how consuming it is and how seriously you take it. Like I said the other week, personally, it is not in me to boo an Arsenal player. It's not really in me to boo anyone, to be honest. I don't know. I still, even in the heat of the moment, feel a bit silly doing it, because it's quite a silly thing to do when you think about it. Like, being a grown man or woman and just making that sound is a little bit odd, and maybe I'm kind of overthinking it. But so it's
like throwing your beer in the air and splashing it all over everybody when a goal is scored. The whole thing is silly. There's guys kicking a round inflated ball across a park into some designated nets. Like, it's the whole thing is ridiculous. So if you want to pull on that thread, the whole sweater falls apart. If you want to destroy the sweater, pull the string as I walk away. I mean, that is the famous Weezer lyric, and it really holds up here. Look, I think there's another point, though, and this is what I want to get into, this whole gaslighting concept, and you see it so much on social media. We have the worst fans. The fans are the worst. They can take it, they can dish it out, but they can't take it. First of all, they shouldn't have to take it. That's not how this works. This is a one-way transaction, okay? The fans are there to cheer and yell and boo and scream and vent and spleen, and the multi-millionaire players and managers are there to put on this production. That's what you know what? If you are an actor and you get paid $50 million to go do a Hollywood movie, and a guy who's paid $18,000 a year to write reviews on some website says, I thought your performance was poor, fucking suck it up. That's how it works, and that's not to say you don't have a right to meet your critics in a marketplace of ideas. But I do think that blaming fans and criticizing fans is the ultimate form of gaslighting, Tim, because the notion that, no, it's not the people who are paid professionally to do this well are the problem. It's the people who pay their good money, the working class people sitting in the stands or on social media thousands of miles away, who aren't happy with it. they are the problem. And we can debate the nuance of how much real, proper, full-throated support can help a team. But I'm going to tell you something. Liverpool are probably going to win the title. Liverpool, Fortress Anfield. Arsene Wenger was going on beIN Sports talking about it. I can remember some games in the very recent past where Anfield was a library, where those fans were committing literal acts of racism, okay? Where they were supporting a racist, biting, disgusting, despicable player because he kicked some balls into net. Like, the idea that fans don't have toxicity within little segments is wrong. The idea that any fan base supports when things are going really bad is wrong, because they don't. Newcastle fans, I can tell you they don't. Hell, Newcastle players were fighting each other on the pitch not so long ago. So I don't know why we have this obsession with criticizing criticizing the people who are only guilty of really, really caring and expressing that care in various ways. And again, I'm not talking about the people who do it improperly, who send death threats. I mean, even, I even find Grotti adding a player or adding the manager in a discussion on Twitter. Like, if I'm saying, Emery sucks, and then someone ats him into a mention of mine, like, no, don't do that. That's completely ridiculous behavior. But so now this may all kind of feel like navel gazing, but the reason I get into this is because, Tim, I think we are at a point now where there is this maybe tendency to say, actually, the fans are just the fans have too much expectation. The fans want instant gratification. The fans are entitlement. That's the word I'm looking for. Have a sense of entitlement. And actually, if they were patient, things would go well. I saw some chat on Twitter today about, that we would have been calling for Klopp to be sacked in his first season. And I think it's patently ridiculous. Nonsense. And the gaslighting to me is the notion that we have somehow our evaluation of Emery is off base. Our evaluation of what's happening is off base. So in your mind, how do you respond to the idea that we have not been fair somehow in this evaluation? And I don't mean we, you and me. I mean that the sort of collective Arsenal diaspora has not been fair in its evaluation, and that we would have been running Klopp out of town on a rail. Yeah,
I mean, first of all, I saw the tweet that you referenced. I mean, first of all, let's look at how much support Liverpool fans gave Roy Hodgson, shall we? When an appointment's wrong, and people tend to be able to pick up on it. But I think what it is, first of all, it's exceptionally insular. It's that being guilty of believing that your experience is universal, and being guilty of kind of looking at something you experience every day and assuming that therefore is what the entire world is.
There's a logic bias name for that. I can't remember which one it is, but survivorship. That's it.
Yeah, immediacy bias. It's exactly that. I just Google Napoli fans at the moment, Napoli ultras. Have a little look at what's going on with Carlo Ancelotti there. It's a little bit worse than a bit of booing at the Emirates. And by the way, Ken Early in the Irish Times last week wrote a brilliant article about kind of why London grounds are slightly different in terms of how they express dissatisfaction. But it's exceptionally colloquial. I mean, which is not to say the atmosphere around Arsenal isn't a little bit negative, and that there aren't people who just sit there and moan for moaning's sake, like there are at every club. But just look around, get out of your little kind of rabbit hole and poke your head up once in a while and have a look at what's going on elsewhere, because it's not. I tend to think the idea that anything is really entirely exclusive to a fan base a bit silly. To be honest with you, there will be different flavors of fans in every fan base, but I think where it comes from, and so you get this kind of Arsenal fans would have run Klopp out of town after 5 months, and it's I don't really remember a lot of Arsenal fans in their saying he was doing a bad job at that point. I don't remember a lot of Liverpool fans saying it, and they said it about Hodgson in far less time. So it's and Emery's been in charge for quite a bit more than 5 months. And when Emery was at the 5 month stage, let's say January this year, was there a lot of Emery out sentiment? I didn't see much, to be honest. So that's a complete false equivalency. Where it kind of comes from, I think it's easy. sometimes when people are exposed to people who really are just truly negative and a bit toxic, and again, every fan base has those people, it's easy to believe that everyone's like that. It's like it's like when you write an article or something, or you put a piece of content out there, and 10 people can say, great piece, really enjoyed that, but disagreed with it, blah blah blah. But the one guy that says that was shit and you're an idiot, like, that's the guy that gets you, and that's the one that makes you feel, that's the feeling you take away, So there's like a little bit of that going on. But I think the main place it comes from is people just trying to change the subject, and people who, and I kind of get it. I think it's a bit childish, but I get it. It's people who don't want the club to be criticised and therefore look to deflect the debate. And the easiest way to deflect the debate is to blame it on the fans. And I get that there are some fans that annoy people, just like there are people that annoy people. You get on the bus or the train to work in the morning, there's going to be someone that fucking annoys you. That doesn't mean that all commuters are idiots just because like one stood on your foot and didn't say sorry when they were like wrestling their way off the train. But that's the memory you take with you, right, of your commute. If one person pissed you off, then you'll be like, oh, that was awful. So there's some things that are conscious and subconscious. There are some things that are understandable. There are some things, though, that are just downright dishonest, and that I quite object to. And that's what I was talking about earlier as well, like the conflation between... I understand, not to relitigate the Xhaka incident, I understand it in Xhaka's mind that when you've got people going at you, it becomes amorphous. And, that's just how stress works. Stress is always a build-up, and you explode at one person for something that 100 other people did to you before them. But, supporters conflating those things, that's just downright dishonest. Quite a lot of the time, and I think a lot of those people know it deep down. So then let's get to the pointy end real quick with the last thought here, which is just the time seems to be up on Emery, and I said on the regular podcast that I think he will be sacked soon. There are some worrying noises, again, there's that word again, coming out of the club. Certainly what was briefed to David Ornstein was worrying. I think the statement that they put out subsequently felt a little more like the dreaded vote of confidence that comes before a manager's moved on. But then Guillaume Balaguer, who I think was sort of close to Raul and one of the first to cross the Emery story and so on and so forth, put out an interview today on social media that basically was like, things aren't that bad. Here's why they're not that bad. And the club agrees it's not that bad, which is patently ridiculous in my mind. But so, I mean, let's look at this logically. You might have a half-empty stadium for the Frankfurt game. You're definitely going to have 10,000 or so empty seats for the Southampton game. There are going to be boos for 80 of the 90 minutes unless it's, a 5-0 victory. And a lot of jeering. You're going to start to get the banners. You're going to start to get the walkouts and all the things that fans start to do when they get really annoyed. And it's November. My reason for thinking he will be sacked is I think that there's a point of untenability, that's probably not a word, where it just can't go on. Like, even if they want it to go on, it can't, short of Stan literally saying, I will not pay this guy off, period, end of story. So for you, I mean, do you see my argument that it could reach a low where you just can't do 5.5 months of that even if you want to? Or are you more inclined to believe that the statements coming out are accurate and that these guys are going to stick with them for the season? No, so I think that it looks like there have been some briefings like he's got till Christmas kind of thing, and they're looking at that Christmas period and they're going to see how things have shaped up like after the Man U game on January the 1st. And I think that makes a bit more sense, to be honest. I mean, I still don't agree with it at all. And I think, an international break in November, I just think this is the best time to do it, rather than changing in January, particularly because I think if we stay with Emery, it's just going to be beyond us by then. But I am more inclined to believe that. And yes, and look, with the Xhaka thing, right, here's a quite uncomfortable truth. Whether you agree with how this has happened or not. And I'm not entirely sure I do agree. I do think Xhaka was a bit unfortunate to be made a lightning rod for all this. But it worked, didn't it? Yeah. Because he's not playing and it looks like he's going to leave. And actually, the fans that booed him have kind of got what they wanted. Maybe not in the most glorious of circumstances, but it's kind of worked, hasn't it? And some of the the kind of toxicity towards the end of the Wenger reign, it took a while, but it worked, didn't it? Like the empty seats and the disgruntlement, and because here's the thing, right? I'm not sure how far like Raul and Edu are the issue. I think it's the Cronkies. I think everything we said before, they're disengaged, so they will be slow to pick up on and react to trouble. They just will, because they're not engaged. They don't care about the sporting success of the team, and that's the thing that's going to keep slapping us in the face over however long that they're owners. And that's a really depressing thought, but I think it's one we've got to confront. When things go bad, they will be allowed to go bad for too long, because Stan and Josh Kroenke do not care about the sporting success of Arsenal. They don't care. They're not invested in it, and we have to confront that. So when we go through a bad period or we make a bad appointment, we will tolerate it for longer than we should, because it will take, they're too removed both physically and emotionally from the situation, so they will take too long to pull the trigger, and we're just going to have to go through that at the moment. But I tend to agree. I think the fans have kind of been shown that action can work. Whether you should take it or not, or whether you should take the other view and go, well, actually what we should try and do is create a positive atmosphere and help them out of the slump and everything like that. In reality, that's not going to happen. That's not how masses of people operate. They just don't. Just look at how people vote in elections, right? People don't vote for positive reasons, they vote for negative reasons. This is why bastards win elections, because they tell you everything. They tell you the negative things that they will get rid of, and that's what people vote for, because that's how people think en masse. That's how crowd logic operates. And I think that eventually, as you say, people will drift away, the grumbling will continue, Xhaka's gone, someone else will become the lightning rod. And eventually, the very fact that they referenced the noise, and should the external noise allow it to do so, suggests that they pay heed to that noise. Yeah,
they are definitely across, I think, fan sentiment. And whether that's on social media or on blogs and podcasts or on AFTV or, at the ground itself, I'm sure they're across it. And, Tim, sometimes you have to think about how these things operate behind the scenes instead of just what you're seeing before your eyes. And if Raul's trying to negotiate with agents and they're like, I'm just not going to send your player to this club right now. He doesn't want to play for Emery. I don't want him playing for Emery. And if they're in negotiations with Lacazette and Aubameyang's agent, and their agents are like, this guy's a fucking mug and we want him gone, or we're not re-signing under any circumstances. Maybe that's already been decided. And if Lucas Torreira's agent's like, we need him away from Emery as fast as possible, and there's, people sniffing around Guendouzi, and go ahead.
And that's what I was going to say as well. What this could come down to, I jokingly said on Twitter the other day, imagine if they did a player vote for whether Emery should stay, like they did with the captaincy. And, we're talking about affirmative action to try and get rid of the manager. What if it comes from the players first?
See, I do think that carries weight. I really do. And because ultimately, can Raul get by on his, very, very comfortable life every day if Emery is absorbing a ton of abuse? He can. But what happens when it makes Raul's job hard? What happens when he looks like he's a failure? What happens when it blows back on him? Then I think it gets more difficult. And Edu too, who's only now in the job and is going to be like, what did I walk into? No wonder Monchi didn't want to come here, right? So I think those problems can hasten a change. And the only situation, to your point, is if these guys go to Stan and say, look, we need the money to pay off Emery. It's not working. We got to make a change. And Stan says, well, who you got in mind? And they're like, we're going to do a caretaker for the rest of the season, but we have some good ideas lined up for that time. Then Stan might say, then you know what? Stick with him till the end of the season so we don't have to pay him out. I don't want to spend $3 million or $4 million, whatever it is, pounds, just so we can have a caretaker in charge. And and if that is the case, then you know what, Tim? Then we're really fucked. Because critical decisions that have to be made that affect the connection between the fans and the clubs and the sporting success of the club and all that are coming down to relatively paltry sums of money that impact the bottom line. I don't know that that's the case, but the only argument I could see for why they will stick this out to the end of the season is they can't get the guy they want permanently till the summer. And so given the option between a caretaker and Emery, Stan has said, let's just stick with the guy I don't have to buy out. And that could be it, and that would be a worry.
Wouldn't surprise me at all. Yeah.
All right, let's leave it there. Tim's on Twitter at Stoberto. Thanks, Tim.
My pleasure as always.
After a short break, Lewis is going to be up to talk about the Aubameyang situation. So it's more fun. It's all fun all the time. But the important thing is it's your fault. And that is something you should internalize. We'll be back with more right after this. Stay with us. Okay, it's time to tell you about The Athletic, the new home of football writing and a world-class sports website. You can get The Athletic for half off and a month trial right now if you go to theathletic.com/ArsenalVision. You'll help the pod, and of course you'll help The Athletic too, but that's a good thing because you will be at the new home of football getting world-class writing and the best coverage of Arsenal from writers like Amy Lawrence, whom we love, has been on the pod, David Ornstein, James McNicholas, also known as Gunnerblog, myself, but don't let that hold you back. The coverage of sports is unrivaled, and there's no advertising to get in the way, no clickbait. They're not chasing ad revenue. They're just trying to write great in-depth articles. They've broken some incredible news. They've had some incredible interviews. Loved the article about the Eddie Nketiah load to Leeds and how that came about. So there's a lot to like there. Try it out. It's a month free. And then if you stick with it, it's $2.50 a month. That's it. So you can go to theathletic.com/ArsenalVision and try it now. See what all the buzz is about. Go sign up now, theathletic.com/ArsenalVision. All right, we're back. Just time for a quick chat with Lewis Ambrose. You can find him on Twitter at LGAmbrose. Hello, Lewis.
Hello.
Yeah, really appreciate you doing this and been wanting to get you on for a long time. I'm sorry that it has to be under these circumstances, but there is a bit of a brouhaha going on with Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. And, you know, look, he's an interesting character. You know, he drives around in a Lamborghini that is reflective and stuff, and he likes a little bit of bling, and that's fine. He also seems to have formed a really wonderful friendship with another striker who, you know, that relationship could have been a problem for the club if they hadn't hit it off. He did a nice job with that. He took Guendouzi under his wing. I mean, I think that there's a lot about Aubameyang to like, but the way he is being painted right now for liking a few posts on social media, for hanging around with troops for AFTV, and now this Instagram post where he basically says, I'll hang out with whoever I like, go fuck yourself, essentially, being painted as a bit of an irritant. So I want to do a few things. First, before we get to what's currently happening, a lot of people are pointing to Dortmund and saying, see, he was a problem there, now he's a problem here, this guy's a problem. Can you just quickly deal with the assertion that Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang was an irritant or a problem at Dortmund, why that assertion exists and whether it's accurate?
So I've never reliably come across anything. I've never personally felt like that Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang was a big problem at Borussia Dortmund. He is definitely a unique kind of guy. I think everybody can see from the way he dresses and things like that. This isn't a shy and retiring kind of guy. And I think then you can expect some, for want of a better word, some problems with him. He's kind of going to be off the cuff, and sometimes he's going to try and bend the rules and see how far they bend before they break. At Dortmund, there were a couple of occasions, for example, where players had a day off, and he would take his day off to fly to Milan, where his brothers were living, and go to a birthday party or something. Then he would turn up at training late the next day. And Dortmund at times banned him from games. There was a couple of games where Dortmund actually just turned around and said, even Champions League, and they turned around and said, no, we're not letting somebody do that to us, so you're not playing tomorrow. Aubameyang would come back in the next week, probably score. There was one weekend Dortmund played, I think, Benfica in the Champions League. He was out for that exact reason. Then he was back in the team at the weekend against Hamburg, and he scored a hat-trick. And everybody laughs and smiles and goes, yeah, well, I guess that's why you can let him get away with some things like that. The real issues at Dortmund came when he was moving to Arsenal. So he'd been expected to leave in the summer. Obviously, he joined Arsenal in January. He was expected to leave Dortmund the previous summer. For various reasons, a move didn't materialize. He was expected to go to China. Then Dortmund sold Ousmane Dembele after he went on strike from training, after Barcelona showed interest in him. And then Aubameyang basically followed suit. Dembele went on strike to get his move. So in January, when Aubameyang knew there was interest from Arsenal, he went on strike to get his move. He also complained about some, let's say, unfortunate kind of idioms that were used in German that he thought were racist. And then I think, especially from journalists that I follow on Twitter and that I do respect, there were then a sort of, it's hard to, I don't want to call it like white-splaining or something serious like that, but I felt like they didn't really understand why him, with his poor to average understanding of German, would take offence to what had been said about him. Personally, as somebody who speaks German but English, or kind of speaks German, English as a first language, and I definitely saw where he was coming from there. I think others, because of his previous behaviour at times, sort of thought he was just trying to do as much as he could to engineer a move, and it was all a bit faux outrage. And I don't really think that was the case. And you mentioned it at the top there, the relationship with Lacazette and things like that. This guy is not, in my opinion, this guy's not like a serial troublemaker, but we've seen it with his relationship with Dortmund since he's moved even. If you say something about him, if you attack him, his choices, his lifestyle, he's going to bite back. He's not going to take it. That's just who he is. He's not going to sit there. I mean, imagine if Thierry Henry had social media when he was around. And he's not going to, he's not going to sit there.
He's outspoken. He's not going
to let you tell him who he can and can't be friends with, regardless of what any of us on an individual level thinks about it. And he's outspoken. He's also very straight to the point and direct, I think, when his back is against the wall a little bit. And I don't think too much wrong personally was said about what Aubameyang's done or been doing. But I think this reaction from him, I think any young one could have seen it from a mile off, to be honest.
So then let's sort of fast forward to what's going on now. And I mean, some of this seems to stem from the fact, presumably, now David Ornstein wrote an article about this. Earlier in the pod, we talked about David Ornstein and the respect we have for him and the fact that he definitely clearly has sources. But some of the stuff he reported has been called into question by Troops, who says, I wasn't in Oba's box, I've never been in Oba's box, and by Aubameyang himself with his social media posts. But what's your just sort of 30,000 foot view initial take on this tempest in a teapot, so to speak, about Aubameyang liking social media posts that maybe he shouldn't and fraternizing with AFTV and how it might be impacting the dressing room?
So I completely understand why teammates would be pissed off if Aubameyang has a personal relationship with people who, in my opinion, very vocally criticize individual players, who sometimes the criticism can go way beyond the kind of barrier between criticism of a footballer and actually getting personal. I think you can see largely the dressing room view on the guys involved with AFTV from Hector Bellerin, what he said about them 2 years ago now, I think, almost 2 years ago, or more than 2 years, I'm not sure. I think it's about a year and a half ago. I think I would not be surprised if that is the view of the dressing room. So it wouldn't shock me if people are a bit annoyed about Aubameyang's what seems like quite a close personal relationship, considering it's between a footballer and a fan, with like Troops in particular. But at the same time, the timing of this is so ridiculous from Arsenal's point of view.
So let's try to dig under the nails a little bit and find the dirt. Do you think that some of this might be prepping fan sentiment for the reality that Aubameyang is not going to be sticking around much longer?
Possibly. I think that if Aubameyang leaves Arsenal, if he doesn't sign his new contract and therefore leaves in the summer, I think it will be because Arsenal will not be in the Champions League. I think that will be the reason it happens, which is not a situation where Aubameyang is the bad guy. So maybe if there are people inside the club who would like to garner more sympathy, then I think it's reasonable to suggest that it's a possibility that they would put stories or a story like this out, especially knowing that there are already people who doubt his professionalism, who talk about what happened at Dortmund in a negative light. I would get it if people thought that that's what's going on here.
The thing that's hard for me too with this is, look, we are all guilty of bias, and I happen to adore Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, the player, but I also kind of like his personality. I like the way he handled the relationship with Lacazette. I like the way he took Guendouzi under his wing. I like the way he has toiled out on the wing so Lacazette could play at times, even though it's not his best position. And I like the way he is by far our best player who has carried us, and we would be in the relegation zone without him. But that doesn't excuse behavior that's not appropriate. I guess the question becomes how much we care about different types of behavior. Some people have asked me why I'm not okay with how Xhaka behaved, for example, but I'm fine with Aubameyang. I would draw a very fine line between a reaction during a game on a pitch that is unprofessional and does not help the team with liking social media posts. I think the other thing is Arsenal have to get dragged into modern big club football one way or the other. Like, Lionel Messi got charged with tax evasion. Cristiano Ronaldo was charged with rape. There's a lot of unsavory shit that goes on with big star players at big clubs. And at big clubs, there are just circuses surrounding these players. And there's always some crazy shit, whether it's Pogba or Hazard or whoever it is. We've seen a little bit of it with Ozil and Erdogan. I mean, making a guy best man at your wedding who has a very questionable human rights, record. There's all kinds of shit that happens at big clubs. Big club football can be a little grotty and unsavory, and the players get mixed up in some weird stuff. So I'm sorry if, he liked a post that was negative towards Emery. Is hard for me to get exercised about. I don't know what's behind it. I don't know how intended it was. And I certainly don't know how much it matters if he's training hard, saying the right things in public and working hard on the pitch. I mean, where do you come down on issues like that in terms of how much of a good boy a player has to be within be coloring within the lines of their responsibility as a employee of the club? Yeah,
I think Aubameyang is paid for and celebrated for scoring goals for Arsenal. And if he's at training late now and then, or doesn't get on great with all his teammates, that kind of thing, then I have not really got a big issue with it. Personally, if he's scoring goals for Arsenal, if he's playing well, if he's not upsetting the team, I think there can be an issue here. If it's genuinely an issue in the dressing room, then I think that's troubling, especially when he's just been made captain. You need your key players, but especially your captain, to have the respect of their teammates, which is something I think we can all agree that Granit Xhaka actually does have. I personally sympathise with Granit Xhaka and the whole reaction where it just felt like, for him, that moment was just boiling point, and I think it was very emotional, and I think we can kind of excuse emotional reactions at times. I think Aubameyang kind of talking with somebody on Instagram and sharing posts on Instagram and liking posts I think that's a bit different to an emotional reaction on the pitch. But ultimately, for me, it does come down to whether or not that's then impacting what happens on the pitch. From what we can see, it's not. Whether or not it's impacting the dressing room is another matter. But I also don't think this would be much of an issue if Arsenal were winning games at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, and part of this comes down to what I think is a really tricky issue. And that is people's relationship with Arsenal Fan TV or AFTV. I think AFTV is one of these things that there are a lot of angles you can come at it. Some people's attitude towards it should be tried at The Hague for war crimes. It is the worst thing in the history of the world.
Unai Emery.
What was that? Along with Unai Emery. Yeah, right. I'm fine with the latter. No, I mean, look, my take on AFTV is kind of like anything I don't care for. I totally acknowledge its right to exist, and I totally acknowledge that there's clearly a segment that it services in a very significant way, an amount of entertainment or a modicum of enjoyment. And I would never dispute its right to exist and do that. I happen to not care for it. I do not like it. I think that some of the guys that are involved with it come across as clowns. I think some of their behavior is not becoming, and I don't love it. But I'm not their dad, and I don't have to watch, and no one's making me watch. I mean, I guess it's a little different if you're at the ground and you're like, I have to see them, I don't have a choice. That's a different issue, and whether the club should allow them to be at the ground. But putting that aside, I think because they are so polarizing, the fact that they have been connected to this story makes the story and the player more polarizing. There are some people that just genuinely feel like, I mean, I'm not kidding, that Arsenal Fan TV is like a criminal organization that should be tried and jailed. I mean, it is that strong a feeling. And I cannot allow myself to get that exercised about people just making YouTube content. And, I think maybe there might be a cultural, not cultural, but generational disconnect too, because I don't know what a Logan Paul is or a KSI is, but like people packed a stadium to watch them fight each other, and apparently they are YouTubers, and like I cannot connect with that at all. I just find the whole thing really interesting, and I recognize that I make a podcast, which wasn't a thing when I was a kid. So like this stuff all changes, and what we consider entertainment and what kind of content surrounds our entertainment and springs off of it is all different. I don't watch Keeping Up with the Kardashians. I think it's ridiculous. Like, if you love it, go have at it. Like, Werner Herzog was in an interview today just saying he watches Keeping Up with the Kardashians. So, like, it's all a little bit weird. But, Lewis, I mean, for you, is Arsenal Fan TV something that, in your mind, deserves the opprobrium it receives, and as a result, Aubameyang deserves it by association?
I think that because it's so polarizing, if it wasn't so successful in terms of views and subscribers and that kind of thing, then this wouldn't really be an issue. It wouldn't be a topic. I think this is also a bit of a carry-on that's gone on for a few years now. I think a lot of people don't like the personalities on AFTV. They don't like the way they conduct themselves, the way they talk about Arsenal, or the way they react after games. Personally, as a fan who I don't anymore because I don't live close by anymore, but I used to go to the stadium a lot, and I always felt, and I think this is a problem with football generally. I don't think this is a problem sort of an exclusively Arsenal related issue. But as a fan in the stadium, I would not have booed or whistled or whatever Granit Xhaka the other week. I feel like I don't pay money to go to the stadium when I do still go to get a good show. I go to the stadium to support the team. Living in Germany, I feel very strongly about the culture that fans can impact a result. Just look at Anfield on Sunday. The noise, the pure noise every time Man City got on the ball. That is 50,000 odd people who believe that they can win their club the game. I feel like Arsenal, after years of kind of sameness, I worry that Arsenal fans have got to a point where now they don't think anything they do has any impact. And I think that's very dangerous, because then I think if you do go and rant about the game and get, I don't know how many views their videos get, 100,000 views or whatever on YouTube, this stuff reaches the players, especially when it goes viral and it reaches the dressing room. It doesn't garner a good atmosphere. And more importantly, the people who are watching it are the people in the stadium, and to me, it justifies being angry at the team in the stadium and at the match and outside the stadium. And it has garnered, the word's been used loads about Arsenal recently, but to me, a really toxic kind of atmosphere that I think is not conducive to getting better results. And I really do believe that when I go to the stadium, if everybody had a similar mindset, that it would help.
And that is fair. I think what I would say with the Arsenal Fan TV thing is there's so much bound up in this. I think there's class warfare bound up in it a little, and I'm not blaming anybody for anything, but I do think sometimes there are people on AFTV that talk about the game a little differently, that use a little different language, that look a little different, that dress a little different from maybe other people that create content or are attached to the game in one way or another. And I want to be very careful about that, because I think, and I don't mean that in a condescending way, and I hope that I'm expressing myself articulately and not making a mockery of the point I'm trying to make, which is simply that there is room for people who look different and sound different and speak differently and analyze differently and feel differently to have content that appeals to them, and that comes from them, that comes from their form of communication. And I think where I struggle with AFTV sometimes is wondering whether it is always totally genuine. Like, I started making a podcast because I just wanted to talk about Arsenal. I didn't start making a podcast to become a celebrity fan. And I do wonder if this has become an act for some people, that if it has stopped being authentic and genuine and started being an act, a persona that they put on because it generates revenue, certainly, and because it generates attention and that sort of celebrity fandom. And that, I think, would be a shame, because I think this stuff is always most valuable when it is a genuine expression of a real opinion and not an act. That would be something I'd concern myself with. But again, I think the point is also that generationally, players are the age of people that watch YouTube and watch YouTubers. And So they will see this stuff. They won't hear the Arsenal Vision post-match podcast. They don't hear that kind of analysis, most likely. I doubt it would interest them because they'd be like, this person thinks they know football and they don't. But they like the sort of emotive, performative reactions on YouTube. That's what YouTube is about. And so they will see it and they will hear it, and it will split the dressing room. Bellerin hates it. Maybe Aubameyang thinks it's hilarious. And maybe he is trying to curry favor so he doesn't come in for criticism. Who knows? I mean, those kind of machinations, I think, go a step too far. But where it leaves us now, Lewis, is the big question, which is simply, with what has happened and how this has played out, do you think that there is an outcome where Aubameyang re-signs and stays with Arsenal, and what would have to happen for you to feel that could come to pass?
I think the bigger issue is that I don't think Arsenal will be in the Champions League next season, and therefore Aubameyang won't sign a new contract and stay at Arsenal.
If they were in the Champions League next season, do you think he would stay? Do you think it's that cut and dry?
I think they'd have a very good chance of convincing him to stay. I think that's what I would say anyway. I don't think Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang is going to leave Arsenal because a few people were upset about who he, I don't know, mentions on his Instagram story and who he follows on Instagram. I think if Arsenal win enough games to get into the Champions League, then nobody will be talking about this.
Yeah, you know, that is an interesting point, by the way, because I've heard the argument thrown around that the big problem with AFTV is they make money off negativity and money off the struggles of the club. But like, if the club was winning, they'd be making money off the success of the club. You know what I mean? Like we can only talk about the content we've got to talk about, you know?
I mean, I do think it has been in the past like overly negative, even when like the team have been in winning runs.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that for sure.
Or playing good football, and I feel like then, like a few years ago, then maybe the people on AFTV would kind of look for somewhere else to criticize if it wasn't just sort of staring you in the face. I also think like all of this. I mean, you're here doing the Arsenal Vision podcast a few times a week.
Every
usually.
day it feels like, yeah.
And I'm sure that sometimes we lose and you get more listeners, but also sometimes we lose and we're just losing so often that you don't get more listeners.
And that is, by the way, that is a misconception. What I will tell you is, sure, you might get a spike in listeners for a really bad result when people need a catharsis, but overall, bad results lead to long-term declines in listeners, long-term declines in all of the metrics that measure the success of this stuff. Our biggest growth is always when things have been going well, when something exciting is happening, when we sign Pepe, that kind of stuff, you know?
Oh, and look, at the moment, I get the notification that the new podcast is up, and I look at it for a minute, and I'm like, well, is it just going to be the exact same as last week's podcast?
Because what are you going to say? Exactly.
Because that's what it feels like at times.
And to be fair, I mean, sometimes like you watch something or listen to something because you want to glean something really insightful about it, and sometimes you just want. I mean, look, I have shows I watch, TV shows I watch that are really intellectual and interesting and fun, and then I watch Rick and Morty because it's just hilarious and my brain can switch off, or, you know, I think it's smarter than that. But anyway, you get the point. I think we should leave it there. Look, I think one of the issues that's going to run with this, though, is that Aubameyang now has been thrust into being the club captain, and I think that will sort of change the calculus on his behavior a little bit, too. So this will continue to be interesting. Hopefully it will die down, because I think it's just the most interesting thing about him is banging the ball in the back of the net. Lewis is on Twitter at LG Ambrose. Thanks, Lewis.
Thanks. My
name's Let's Be the Block Man, Twitter, Yankee Gunner. We will have a mailbag pod probably later this week or start of next week just for patrons. So get your questions in the mailbag Discord, or I will post a Patreon post where you can put the questions in the comments there. In any event, we love you, and we'll talk to you after Arsenal 10, Southampton. No.